Hey everyone, how's it going? Juan Dhas here, and welcome back to this week's lesson video. And that thing is still sounding. Anyway, welcome back to this week's lesson video. Just playing around with my freeze a little bit. Now, for today's video, I was thinking about what to talk about, and initially I was going to talk about outside playing, because I was listening to a lot of Chick Corea recently, actually to a very specific record called Time Warp with Bob Berg, Gary Novak, John Petitucci, incredible quartet record. Check out the tune New Life. So initially I was going to talk about outside playing, and I'd already done a video kind of on how to play on one chord, which touches really on kind of like the harmonic things you can do or things you can really take on in trying to do outside playing. I'm going to put the link up here for those interested. But in actually thinking about what I was going to talk about, I realized that most of it boiled down to tension and release, or tension and resolution, which for me felt like a much more interesting topic to tackle, because it doesn't just revolve around the binary coin of, is this inside the tonality or is this outside? It's a little more nuanced, and well, I guess whoever's been on this channel for a while or subscribed for a while knows that I like nuance. I like talking about little things you can do and paths you can take to, well, be yourself. So in talking about tension and resolution, I realized, or rather thinking about it, I realized that there was a lot you could do with it. And I wanted to talk a few ways of how you can use tension and release as a soloist to make your solos a little more engaging, a little more ear-catching, let's say, or rather draw a listener's interest in. Because we can sit and talk about harmony and harmonic concepts and phrasing all day, but if you don't have this key element of phrasing down, then your solos can get a little monotonous, or rather on the opposite end of the spectrum, it can be filled with too much information. You're always playing a balancing act. So I'm going to treat this a little bit as a perspectives episode. Now with tension release, there are a couple of paths you can go down. As I was mentioning earlier, one of the obvious paths is thinking of the idea of inside and outside. You know, we have a tonality. In this case, I was playing around with D, right? Just an open D sound, and playing inside, but then also drifting. Pretty far away from the key. And I want to sum up that there are a couple of ways you can go about this. And rather, I invite you to, instead of thinking of tension and release as something extremely specific, zoom out a little more, and you'll find yourself thinking of axes. And I actually talk about this in motivic development videos and stuff like that, because it's a valuable concept. If you can think of an axis, you have infinite room essentially to play around with. So, for example, I'm just going to have this D pedal going pretty quietly in the back. Now, I can think of this D pedal and go, okay, what can I do with this? Well, for starters, as I said, there was inside-outside. That's one axis. Right? There's another axis, which is space, or rather density in this instance, what I was thinking of. Right? Density. How many notes am I cramming into this thing? Can zoom out from that even more and think literally space, as in nothing, or actually filling the space. There is dynamics of loud and soft. For example, if I just turn up my volume a little bit. Your dynamic range. That's another one. Density, but in terms of chords. Do I have single notes? Or do I have Multiple voices or big voices. Right? There are I'm just going to leave it there. So basically, there are a multitude of ways we can go. And this is something I invite you to think about. Take an axis and play around with it in your practice session. Play around with the idea that you can move from one extreme to the other. And what you'll find is that sometimes this can get you out of ruts. Very too often, sometimes we lock ourselves into a manner of playing a very specific solo. Sometimes certain improvisers can struggle with, and I know I've struggled with it, with having the same arc for every solo. And it gets predictable. So sometimes you want to break out of that. And in listening to that Chick record I was talking about at the beginning, Time Warp, one thing that was really apparent was that these guys were just having the simplest, it was like a C minor vamp, and then eventually went somewhere else, I think like an E sus or something like that. But it was just one chord that was singularly turning into this incredible way of just weaving in and out of the tonality and creating seemingly infinite ideas. Now, are these ideas foreign? I wouldn't say so. They're concepts that you and I are very well familiar with. But I think one thing that separates incredible improvisers from people who are just getting started is that incredible, like really top-level improvisers have this capacity to just kind of turn on a dime and really just take a complete 180 and go in any direction they please. And I think one of the first steps we can do to start maybe getting closer to that level, or just getting out of our current rut, let's say, is to consider some of these paths. So, for example, how would I go about this? Well, let's say we have our friendly little context, D. Like open D, I'm not stating whether it's D minor or D major. I can play really melodic. And then I can turn on a dime. And you see at the same time, I'm playing with this dynamic axes. Resolve. I'm really kind of taking that tonality axis and kind of pushing and pulling it. But let's say we wanted something maybe a little more tonally pleasing. Let's say, because you know I don't want to like kick everyone out of the club basically, but tension. I'm creating tension by essentially going from one end of the spectrum to the other. Release. That's another tension building device. I'm deliberately exploiting the same idea. Just a single note. And resolving it. So, in essence, today's lesson's kind of more of a, as I said, a perspectives lesson. I haven't done one in a little while, so it was kind of interesting that this came to mind. But I want you to start thinking in or I invite you to at least kind of think about things a little bit when you're improvising and when you're next playing. Am I playing the same solo all the time? Am I really playing in the same headspace all the time? How can I get out of this? Start by maybe identifying where your ruts or which axes you tend to lean towards the most. And then play around with that axis because it's already familiar. Like let's say, okay, maybe my soloing is a little tonal. I can experiment with pulling the tonality around a bit. Then try some other axes. How about rhythm? Can it be rhythmically sparse or rhythmically dense? Rhythmically open or rhythmically precise? Dynamics. Can I play really soft or really loud? Play with that axis in your solo. You see the point I'm getting at. The point I'm getting at is essentially try something new and try take on this idea and exploit that spectrum by tension release, by going either to the extreme, either to one extreme or the other. For example, playing really soft for an extended period of time and then suddenly shifting or beginning to make a transition to the other end of the spectrum, or vice versa. So it's a little bit of an esoteric and philosophical lesson, but I think a useful one nonetheless that can help you guys get out of some ruts and really start thinking about your soloing in a more musical way. So I'm going to jump on Patreon to talk maybe about a few exercises you can use to mess around with this, and I will see you in next week's video. Take care, guys.